It feels like a pretty distant memory at this point, but the Devil May Cry reboot used to be one of the all-time biggest games people would bring up as a game that ruined a franchise, up there with things like Sonic 06. People have generally done their best to forget it as the games moved back into line later on, but it doesn't change the fact that this did happen. Dante's characterization in particular was just a massive departure for the character. Aside from just doing a whole bunch of really cool stunts and having super cool looking demon designs, the appeal of Dante and the franchise in general to me is the extreme cheese and over-the-top nature of the series. I mean, in this cutscene in DMC4, he outright starts having a song with this scientist guy. The man just has a quip for almost any occasion.
You summon and kill. Summon and kill. I fail to see the logic here. Said it. The price to pay for power?
It's like that era of Sonic the Hedgehog during the 2010s where he was super self-aware of everything, but they have fun with it rather than use it as an excuse for terrible writing.
Hey, did somebody here order a clobbering? Are you sure? It says somebody ordered an extra large clobbering topped with everything. Okay. Tell you what, I can't take this thing back, so I'll give you an extra large clobbering for nothing. Hope you're hungry.
So turning Dante into an edgy teenager who hates everything, has none of the original's witty banter, and just responds to everything with constant cursing, was a massive change for the series, and I could see why people hated it so much. Most of the other demons in the reboot didn't fare better. Their dialogue consists of more generic cursing, and when they're not doing that, they're resorting to gross out for the sake of it. Mundus does disgusting on-camera activities that will get me demonetized, and the infamous so-called succubus, if you can consider it one, is just constantly vomiting between every other line of dialogue that it says. Now, with all of this in mind, the game is almost universally hated and all of the characters are hated from it. The main characters of Dante, Vergil, and Mundus are all entirely ruined. But you know what I consider a main character of the DMC franchise? The random super cheesy bosses. While not a singular entity, Devil May Cry is filled with both cool and idiotic demon designs that are my favorite part of the series. As terrible of a fight as Devil May Cry 2's infested chopper is, the concept of a random possessed helicopter with eyeballs coming out of it is pretty hilarious to me. I don't know about you. While most of the random demons in this game aren't exactly home runs, there's one exception who's super memorable to me from this game: Bob Barbas. Bob is a parody of real-life news, and he has all of the bumpers over all of his TV segments. He makes a few appearances throughout the game before his boss fight to build him up, constantly denouncing Dante and calling him a terrorist who should be given the most severe penalty possible. While he comes off as extremely eccentric, you could vaguely believe that at least in his mind, he's just looking out for the people and trying to stop violent crime. Bob is also the only character who is remotely reluctant to swear, which is a breath of fresh air in this game. Yeah, he does still swear like everyone else in the game during his boss fight, but at least that's when he's under pressure rather than all the time. Constantly calling out Dante as being vulgar and degenerate comes across pretty funny when this is the version of Dante we're talking about. The developers of this game were generally aware of the fan reaction to Dante's character shift and actively insulted fans of the originals, having him put on a white wig for 5 seconds to look more like the classic Dante and having him say how awful it is. Bob Barbas, on the other hand, does something that is actually clever and doesn't insult fans in any way. Bob constantly tells Dante that the public hates him, which, yes, has meaning in universe, but more importantly, it has real-life parallels, since Dante's character is so universally hated. The actual point where they take this news aesthetic to the extreme is in his boss fight, though, and that's the big thing that sold me on this character as a memorable encounter. At the entrance, you're literally platforming through the interface of a news broadcast based on their commercial bumpers. That's not an aesthetic I've seen in anything else, and it's super cool. It's the same reason why casinos are a great aesthetic for video game levels. An evil newscaster who spreads fake news with a palace that's made up of a news broadcast station feels like it would be a perfect fit for one of the villains in Persona 5, for example. Once the boss itself starts, Bob Barbas is effectively a computer demon, whose face is constantly pixelating and falling apart. Yes, you can see that he's sort of a stereotypical floating head boss, but he doesn't bother attacking with his hands at all, and his attacks are entirely virtual, digitized computer attacks. This is supposed to represent Bob's control over the media, and it looks really visually impressive. What's more, Bob's body does sometimes exist, he's not just a floating head, and his computerized face sometimes phases in and out to show it, as well as the rest of his body attached to said face. This is entirely aesthetic rather than making him some boring, generic giant boss that attacks you with his hands, and it's really visually striking. The other really memorable part about this boss is that after long enough, Bob will transport you into some random levels to do fights against ordinary enemies. The interesting part of this is that it's taken inside of the news interface and he starts talking over it, painting Dante out as some deranged psycho who is killing pointlessly, continuing to destroy his reputation. While the enemies are nothing hard, there is a gameplay component to this, because you have to fight at this overly weird camera angle with all this junk wasting space on the screen. Is the fight perfect? No, definitely not. The gameplay is still really simple and easy, honestly, but presentation-wise, Bob Barbas is absolutely killing this. The low difficulty is more of an attribute of the entire game attempting to be more accessible to players, rather than some sin personally committed by Bob. Bob Barbas and his news organization are very obvious XPs of Bill O'Reilly, who was a famous news anchor, and Fox News. A lot of people hated that because it made the game political or whatever, but this game is so childish and infantile that pretending it has anything insightful to say politically is kind of stupid if you ask me. Regardless of that, literally demonizing this particular celebrity ended up aging very well because of the scandals Bill was involved in, ultimately resulting in him getting fired from Fox News. Bob's catchphrase of, "just doing God's work," is directly taken from Bill, and comes across particularly hilarious when he loyally serves Mundus, who is a demon god within this universe. I only wish Bob could have found somebody better to work for and could have been in a better game, serving under a less terrible version of Mundus or something. As if this wasn't enough for Bob aging shockingly well, one of his biggest things is obviously spreading fake news, which eventually became a massive topic a few years after the game's release in 2016. An extreme caricature of a character like Bob Barbas could represent pretty much anything you want him to when he's so cartoonishly evil. He is designed to be extremely hateable, and in that he most definitely succeeds. Not only because of all of the misinformation that he's saying, but because you get to directly wail on his big dumb face and see lots of overly funny, pained reactions from him as you do so. They have genuine fun with this stupid character, and that's all I'm really asking for. You can blink and you miss it, but the man declares himself the best-looking news anchor in the bumper on the bottom of the screen, for crying out loud. How seriously are you gonna take him? It's an enjoyable, memorable experience that helps to add the wacky Devil May Cry weirdness factor that is otherwise sorely lacking in this title, and I commend Bob for that.
This is Bob Barbas, just doing God's work.
Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see me cover more villains. What villain do you find underrated and doesn't get the recognition they deserve? Do you know of any other diamonds in the rough in some otherwise terrible form of media like the DMC reboot and Bob Barbas? Let me know in the comments, and have an amazing day.